I paid $23,000 for this dock at a county foreclosure auction. I have the deed. I have the receipt. I have 7 years of back taxes paid in full, but when I walked down to the water for the first time to see what I'd bought, a woman was already standing at the end of the pier, as she owned it. She introduced herself as Victoria Marsh, president of the Lakeview Shores HOA, 12 years in charge, and according to her, I was trespassing on community property. No documents, no proof, just crossed arms and the absolute certainty of someone who'd never been told no. She looked at that dock the way people look at things they've stolen and convinced themselves they deserve. That was her first mistake. Her second was assuming I didn't keep receipts. I'm a retired Coast Guard officer, 22 years of documentation, procedure, and chain of custody. She picked the wrong man to lie to. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. My name is Raymond Morgan. 22 years in the Coast Guard taught me that paperwork is the difference between order and chaos. Every inspection, every rescue, every disciplinary action documented, filed, retrievable. When I retired and moved to North Carolina to live near the water, I brought that mindset with me. So when Lakeview County announced a tax foreclosure auction that included a private dock on Miller Lake, I did my homework. 3 weeks of research before I raised my paddle. Title search clean. Tax lien history verified. No competing claims on record. I paid $23,000, settled 7 years of delinquent property taxes, and received a foreclosure deed signed by the county clerk. I thought the hard part was over. The dock sat at the eastern edge of Miller Lake, accessible through a narrow easement that ran between 2 residential lots in the Lakeview Shores subdivision. It was a solid structure 30 feet of weathered pine extending over calm water, with cleats for mooring and a small covered section at the end where someone had installed benches for an abandoned property. It looked remarkably well maintained, fresh boards in several sections, new rope coiled on the posts, a storage box bolted to the decking that someone had recently painted, expensive marine hardware gleaming in the afternoon sun. I noticed these details as I walked down the easement path for the first time, but I didn't process their significance until I saw Victoria Marsh standing at the end of the pier like a sentry guarding territory. She was in her late 50s, dressed in linen pants and a silk blouse that suggested she'd come from somewhere more formal. Behind her, 2 men stood near a pontoon boat tied to my dock, according to the deed in my filing cabinet. The younger one kept checking his phone, clearly uncomfortable. The older one crossed his arms and planted his feet wide, playing the role of enforcer. Victoria didn't introduce either of them. She introduced herself with the practiced authority of someone who'd spent years being obeyed. Mr. Morgan, I presume. I'm Victoria Marsh, president of the Lakeview Shores Homeowners Association. I understand there's been some confusion about this property. Her tone suggested the confusion was entirely mine. This dock has been a community amenity since the previous owner abandoned it. We've maintained it, improved it, and our residents have relied on it for lake access. Whatever you think you purchased at that auction, you need to understand this belongs to the community. I stopped about 10 feet from her, keeping my posture relaxed but my attention sharp. I purchased Lot 47B at a county tax foreclosure sale 3 weeks ago. I have the deed and confirmation that all back taxes have been paid. The property is legally mine. Victoria's smile didn't waver, but something hardened behind her eyes. Deeds can be challenged. Auctions can be invalidated. The HOA has been using this dock continuously that constitutes adverse possession under North Carolina law. Our attorney has already begun preparing the necessary documentation. I almost admired the confidence. Almost. Adverse possession requires 20 years of continuous use in this state, I said calmly. You don't have that. What you have is wishful thinking. The silence that followed was thick with recalculation. The younger man behind Victoria shifted his weight, exchanging a nervous glance with his companion. Victoria studied me differently now, less dismissal, more assessment. I used the moment to look carefully at the dock again. The storage box had Lakeview Shores HOA stenciled on the side. A brass plaque mounted on one of the posts read, Community Dock Est, 2017. Someone had invested real money in this structure, maintained it, improved it, treated it as their own. But not $1 had gone toward the property taxes that would have prevented foreclosure. That asymmetry bothered me in a way I couldn't yet articulate. "This isn't over," Victoria said finally, her voice dropping to something between warning and threat. The polished community leader had vanished. What remained was something harder, more territorial. "The HOA has resources. We have relationships with county officials. We've protected this community for over a decade, and we won't allow an outsider to disrupt what we've built. You'll be hearing from our legal counsel." She turned and walked past me without another word. The enforcer followed immediately. The younger man hesitated, almost apologetic, then hurried after them. I watched them disappear up the easement path, then turned back to the water calm and golden in the afternoon light. I'd come here to retire, to fish, to finally have a piece of waterfront that belonged to me. Instead, I'd walked into something that felt increasingly like a trap. That evening, I spread my documents across the kitchen table and began a systematic review. The foreclosure deed was unambiguous Lot 47B, including all structures and improvements, transferred to me free of prior claims. But the chain of title revealed something I'd overlooked. The previous owner wasn't a person. It was a company, Lakeside Holdings, LLC, registered in North Carolina in 2009, dissolved in 2019. The registered agent's name was listed in small print at the bottom of the filing. Harold Marsh, the same last name as the HOA president who'd just threatened me. Coincidence was possible. But 22 years of documentation work had taught me that coincidences in property disputes usually aren't coincidences at all. Someone had let this dock go to foreclosure. Someone had stopped paying taxes while simultaneously maintaining it for community use. The question wasn't whether this was deliberate. The question was why. I closed the folder and stared out the window at the darkening lake. Victoria had warned me this wasn't over. On that point, at least. We agreed. The formal demand letter arrived 5 days later, delivered by certified mail with a return receipt that someone had clearly insisted upon. The letterhead identified the sender as Lakeview Shores HOA Office of the President, and Victoria Marsh's signature anchored the bottom. 3 paragraphs of carefully constructed intimidation, according to the letter. The HOA had acquired rights to Lot 47B through a community maintenance agreement established in 2017. My purchase was legally questionable and would be vigorously contested. I was ordered to cease all attempts to access community property pending resolution. No agreement number, no legal citation, no attached documentation of any kind. Just authority, asserted as if assertion alone made something true. I drove to the Lakeview County Recorder's office the next morning. The clerk, a patient woman named Sandra, pulled the records I requested within 30 minutes. Plat maps, deed history, HOA formation documents from 1998. I spread them across a research table and started connecting dots. The first discovery came quickly. The original subdivision plat contained a notation I'd missed during my pre-auction research. Lot 47B was explicitly listed as a private waterfront parcel, excluded from HOA common areas and governance. The dock had never been under HOA jurisdiction. The foundation of Victoria's entire claim didn't exist. That revelation led to the next. Tax assessor records showed Lakeside Holdings LLC had purchased the dock in 2010 and paid property taxes consistently until 2017, the same year Victoria Marsh returned to the HOA presidency after a 4-year gap. The payments stopped. No transfer, no explanation. Just silence that ended in foreclosure. Meanwhile, the HOA had filed annual maintenance reports with the county starting that same year. documenting improvements to property they didn't own, new boards, hardware upgrades, safety inspections. They'd spent money maintaining the dock while deliberately avoiding the tax payments that would have prevented foreclosure. The pattern wasn't accidental. It was architecture. I called Amy Clark that afternoon, a title attorney in Raleigh who specialized in foreclosure disputes. Her office was small but efficient, and she reviewed my documentation with focused attention. When she finished, she leaned back and delivered her assessment. "Mr. Morgan, your deed is clean. The foreclosure sale followed proper procedure. The HOA has no legal claim. The plat exclusion alone would kill any adverse possession argument, even if they had the required 20 years. She handed back my folder. "What they're doing is harassment. Send a formal response documenting your ownership and demanding that they cease all use of the dock. If they continue, we escalate to the sheriff." I drafted the response that evening, attaching copies of the foreclosure deed, the plat map exclusion, and the tax payment records, certified mail, return receipt requested. Then I waited. 3 days passed with no response from Victoria or the HOA board. On the 4th day, I drove down to the dock to check on the property. 2 boats were moored at my pier, a pontoon with Lakeview Shores stenciled on the hull, and a fishing boat I didn't recognize. My certified letter might as well have been toilet paper. I stood at the end of the easement path, feeling something shift in my chest. Not anger exactly, something colder. The recognition that Victoria Marsh wasn't going to stop because I asked politely. She was going to stop because I made her. I was photographing the boats when a woman approached from the neighboring property. She introduced herself as Ellen Torres, an 11-year resident of Lakeview Shores. Her expression carried the discomfort of someone about to share information they weren't sure they should. "You're the one who bought the dock at auction," she said. It wasn't a question. "Victoria's been telling everyone you're trying to steal community property." I showed her my phone the deed, the plat map, the tax records. Her face changed as she processed what she was seeing. "We've been paying dock fees to the HOA," she said slowly. $50 a month per household. Victoria said it covered maintenance and insurance for the community dock. She paused, calculating. 43 homes pay that fee. That's over $25,000 a year. The number hit me like cold water. $25,000 annually, collected for access to property the HOA had never owned. Property whose previous owner, connected to Victoria's own husband, had let fall into foreclosure while the association charged residents for the privilege of using it. I thought about the maintenance reports filed with the county, the improvements made to the dock. The administrative fees had to be going somewhere. This wasn't just a dispute over ownership. This wasn't harassment or territorial overreach. The HOA had been collecting money for a dock they had no right to, and that money had been flowing into someone's pocket for years. I thanked Ellen and walked back to my car. County financial records, HOA fee documentation, a formal complaint to the North Carolina Attorney General. The pieces were connecting faster now, each discovery opening a door to the next. Victoria Marsh had built her scheme on the assumption that no one would question the woman in charge. She'd assumed the paperwork would stay buried, the residents would stay obedient, and the dock would eventually become hers through sheer persistence. She'd assumed wrong. Requesting HOA financial records in North Carolina requires membership in the association or ownership of property within its jurisdiction. I had neither, but Ellen Torres did. She filed the formal request the following Monday, citing her right under state law to review how her monthly fees were being spent. Victoria denied the request within 24 hours, claiming the documents contained sensitive financial information that required board approval to release. Ellen appealed to the board. The board, 3 members handpicked by Victoria over 12 years, voted unanimously to uphold the denial. Dead end. Or so Victoria thought. I filed a complaint with the North Carolina Secretary of State the next morning, alleging potential misuse of nonprofit funds and requesting an independent review. 2 weeks later, Victoria received a formal letter requiring the HOA to produce 7 years of financial records or face suspension of their nonprofit status. Ellen called me the afternoon the documents arrived at her house, a thick manila envelope she brought directly to my kitchen table. We spread the pages across the surface and began reading. The fees Ellen had described were all there, but the expenditure side told a different story. Actual dock maintenance lumber, hardware, labor accounted for less than $4,000 per year. The rest flowed into a line item labeled Administrative Services and Grounds Management, paid to a company called Marsh Landscape Solutions. I stared at that name for a long moment, feeling something cold lock into place behind my ribs. Harold Marsh, Victoria's husband. The same Harold Marsh is listed as the registered agent for Lakeside Holdings, LLC, the company that had owned the dock and deliberately stopped paying taxes. I worked through the records page by page. Harold had let his own property fall into foreclosure while Victoria positioned the HOA to absorb it as a community amenity. They'd collected fees from residents, funneled the money to Harold's company, and planned to eventually acquire the dock through adverse possession or a quiet tax sale where no one would bid against them. My appearance at the county auction had disrupted a 7-year operation. $170,000, stolen from neighbors who trusted them. I set the papers down and pressed my palms flat against the table, forcing my breathing to stay even. Not anger. Something colder. The kind of clarity that comes when you finally see the full shape of what you're fighting. I photographed every page and built a timeline connecting the LLC registration, the tax default, Victoria's return to the presidency, and the start of the fee collection. Then I drafted 2 formal complaints, one to the North Carolina Attorney General alleging fraud, and one to the county sheriff documenting ongoing trespassing. I installed a motion-activated security camera at the dock entrance, positioning it to capture anyone approaching from the easement path. If Victoria escalated. I wanted evidence. She escalated faster than I expected. The HOA announced an emergency community meeting for the following Saturday, framed as a discussion about protecting community amenities from external threats. Victoria was preparing her defense, rallying residents before any official investigation could begin. I requested time to address the membership, citing my status as the legal property owner. The board secretary, a nervous woman named Patricia, who seemed increasingly uncomfortable with her role, granted me 15 minutes. The night before the meeting, my phone buzzed with a motion alert at 2:14 in the morning. I opened the camera feed and watched a figure move down the easement path toward the dock. Male, heavy set, carrying a toolbox. The image had that grainy green tint of infrared, but the movements were deliberate. He worked for nearly an hour cutting mooring ropes, loosening boards, removing cleats, systematic destruction. When he turned toward the camera on his way out, the infrared caught his face clearly. Harold Marsh. My jaw tightened. They weren't just defending their scheme anymore. They were trying to make the dock worthless before I could prove it was mine. I saved the footage to 3 separate locations: cloud storage, external hard drive, email to Amy Clark with a timestamp. Then I sat in the darkness of my living room, watching the sun rise over Miller Lake. Victoria and Harold had spent 7 years building their operation. They'd extracted money from their neighbors, manipulated property records, and assumed no one would ever connect the dots. Tomorrow, 67 homeowners would learn exactly how wrong they were. The community center was a converted barn at the heart of Lakeview Shores, large enough to hold the 67 residents who'd responded to Victoria's emergency summons. I arrived 15 minutes early, carrying a laptop and a folder of documents. Victoria was already at the front, arranging chairs behind a folding table like a general preparing a war council. Harold sat in the front row, arms crossed, jaw set, near the back. An older man in a pressed polo shirt studied me as I entered one of the board members who'd voted to deny my access request weeks ago. His expression was unreadable. Victoria saw me, and her mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, as if my presence was an inconvenience she'd already planned to handle. The meeting opened with Victoria commanding the room. Thank you all for coming on short notice. Our community is facing an unprecedented threat. An outside buyer has purchased what he claims is our community dock, and he's now attempting to deny us access to an amenity we've maintained and paid for. Tonight, we discuss how to protect what belongs to all of us. Murmurs of support rippled through the audience. I watched faces the comfortable certainty of people who'd never had reason to question the woman in charge. Mrs. Marsh, I said, rising from my seat. I was granted 15 minutes to address the membership. Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. She couldn't refuse in front of the community she'd promised transparency to. Of course, Mr. Morgan, we believe in fairness here. I walked to the front, connected my laptop to the projector, and turned to face the room. My name is Raymond Morgan. I purchased Lot 47B at a county tax foreclosure auction 8 weeks ago. I have the recorded deed confirming my legal ownership. I clicked on the first image, the subdivision plat with Lot 47B highlighted. The original plat filed in '98. Notice the notation private waterfront parcel, excluded from HOA common areas. The dock was never under HOA jurisdiction. The murmurs shifted tone. People leaned forward, frowning at the screen. I clicked to the next document, a single timeline connecting the pieces I'd assembled. The previous owner was Lakeside Holdings LLC, registered agent Harold Marsh. I let that land. When Mrs. Marsh returned to the HOA presidency, taxes on the dock stopped being paid, while fees started being collected from all of you. Over 7 years, those fees totaled more than $170,000. I showed the financial summary. Actual dock maintenance costs less than $28,000. The rest went to Marsh Landscape Solutions. I paused. Also owned by Harold Marsh. The room had gone still. The older board member in the back was staring at Victoria now, his jaw tight. Harold remained frozen, eyes fixed on nothing. I clicked one final time security footage, the timestamp reading just after 2 in the morning. A figure moving down the easement path, cutting ropes, loosening boards. The infrared image was grainy but unmistakable when he turned toward the camera. Victoria's voice cut through the silence. Those records could be altered. You're manipulating. But her certainty was cracking. I watched her glance at Harold, waiting for him to speak, to defend, to do something. He didn't move. Her hands trembled slightly against the table edge. Harold, she said, quieter now. Nothing. The silence stretched for 3 long seconds. Then something in her broke. We deserve that dock. The words tore out of her, raw and desperate. Harold's family built it. They had to sell during the recession. It was stolen from us. We were just taking back what should have been ours. The admission hung in the air. 12 years of community trust, collapsing in a single breath. A man near the exit stood someone I'd noticed arrive late and position himself by the door. Mrs. Marsh. Mr. Marsh, I'm Deputy Rawlings with the Lakeview County Sheriff's Department. We've received formal complaints regarding fraud, vandalism, and trespassing. I need both of you to come with me. Victoria's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Harold rose slowly, his face the color of ash. Neither resisted as Rawlings escorted them toward the door. Ellen Torres stood in the middle section. I move for a full independent audit of all HOA finances, effective immediately. The motion passed unanimously, hands raised across the room without hesitation. I gathered my laptop, preparing to leave, when the older board member approached the one who'd been watching me since I walked in. I voted to deny your access, he said quietly. I believed her. He extended his hand. I'm sorry. I shook it. Now you know what questions to ask. I walked out into the cool evening air. The tension I'd carried for 8 weeks released slowly, like a rope finally going slack. Victoria's reign had ended in a single evening, not because of threats or lawyers or political maneuvering, because I kept the receipts. And receipts don't lie. The charges came down 6 weeks later. The North Carolina Attorney General's office had built its case methodically. My documentation combined with the HOA financial records and the security footage created an evidence chain that left no room for interpretation. Victoria Marsh faced a Class H felony for fraud. Harold faced misdemeanor charges for vandalism and criminal trespassing. Their attorney negotiated plea deals rather than risk a trial that would have made everything public record in excruciating detail. Victoria received 18 months probation, a $25,000 fine, and a restitution order requiring repayment to every homeowner who'd paid dock fees. Harold received 6 months probation and $5,000 in fines. Both were banned from holding any position in community associations or nonprofit governance for 20 years. The legal system had done exactly what it was designed to do: convert evidence into consequences. The ripple effects moved through Lakeview shores faster than I'd expected. The independent audit Ellen Torres demanded revealed additional irregularities beyond the dock scheme: inflated vendor contracts, questionable expense reimbursements, and years of financial opacity. All 3 board members who'd served under Victoria resigned within weeks. New leadership emerged with a mandate for transparency quarterly reports, independent audits, and open meetings. Ellen was elected treasurer. She called me the day after to say she'd already hired an outside accountant and changed the locks on the HOA office. The restitution checks arrived in mailboxes across the community that December. I happened to be at Ellen's house when hers came, a modest amount, smaller than what had been taken. But she held the envelope for a long moment before opening it. "It's not about the money," she said quietly. "It's proof that it actually happened, that we weren't crazy for believing something was wrong." I understood exactly what she meant. Some receipts matter more for what they represent than what they're worth. Gerald, the older board member who'd shaken my hand at the meeting, stopped by my house a few days later with a bottle of bourbon. He stayed for 2 hours, telling me about his own father being cheated by a business partner decades ago. "I should have recognized it," he said. "The way she controlled information, the way questions got deflected instead of answered." We finished the bottle, watching the lake turn silver in the winter light. I spent the spring working on the dock, new cleats to replace the ones Harold had torn out, fresh boards where he'd loosened the originals, proper mooring lines rated for serious weight. The work took 3 weekends, not because it was complicated, but because I wanted precision. 22 years in the Coast Guard had taught me that structures built carelessly fail when they're needed most. Each measurement I checked twice. Each fastener I drove flush. The craftsmanship mattered as much as the completion. When the repairs were finished, I installed a small wooden sign at the entrance to the pier. Hand-carved letters, stained to match the weathered pine "Second Chance Landing." The dock had been abandoned, exploited, and nearly destroyed. Now it had a future. The first evening I sat at the end of that pier without paperwork to review or calls to make. The sun was dropping toward the western tree line. The water held the light like something precious gold bleeding into amber, bleeding into rose. A kayak passed in the middle distance. Ellen Torres, getting her evening exercise. She raised her paddle in greeting. I raised my hand in return. "Beautiful evening for the water," she called across the distance. I watched her paddle toward the sunset. Victoria Marsh had believed she could take what wasn't hers through authority and assumption. She'd built a 7-year scheme on the conviction that power meant never having to prove anything. Receipts don't negotiate. Deeds don't bend to whoever speaks loudest. And the truth, once documented, has a way of outlasting the people who tried to bury it. I leaned back on the bench and let the last of the tension go. The lake was calm. The dock was solid beneath me, and the sunset was exactly as beautiful as I'd imagined when I first raised my paddle at that county auction.